Hello, everyone. It's Clay Jenkinson. I'm listening to America. This is the statue of York, William Clark's enslaved and body servant. This is in the Belvedere Plaza here in Louisville, Kentucky. I like this statue a lot. It portrays York as a kind of civil rights hero, lean, powerful, and looking across the Ohio at freedom, because as you probably know from your high school history, that north of the Ohio River was free country, thanks to the Northwest Ordinance, and south of the Ohio here in Kentucky was slave country. So he's looking across the river and also back up towards Montana, where he was probably the freest, most sovereign that he was ever going to be. I like the signage here, and I suspect that my friend Jim Holmberg had a hand in this, but here's the signage. There are 3 written panels and a map. Remember the Louisville expedition, Pacific Ocean. York was the first African-American to cross the United States from coast to coast, born a slave. York was assigned as a boy to be William Clark's servant. I think maybe you have to put slave in there, even though it's a body servant. He moved with the Clarks from Virginia to Jefferson County in 1785 and grew to maturity on the frontier, learning all the skills necessary to survive in the wilderness. Experienced traveler by horse and boat, traveled extensively in the U.S. was William Clark. In July 1803, Clark accepted an invitation from his old army friend Meriwether Lewis to join him as co-captain of an exploring venture to the Pacific, ordered by President Thomas Jefferson. Clark began recruiting men from the Louisville area for the Corps of Discovery. Clark decided York would also go, but he was never an official member of the Corps. I really like these panels. This is good signage, and it's exactly what's needed in the Lewis Clark world. It's not preachy. It's not self-righteous. It's thoughtful, comprehensive. It tells the truth in a way that has not been told through most of the last 200 years, and gives York his proper due as the tenth and really one of the most important young men from Kentucky on the Lewis and Clark expedition. I'm Clay Jenkinson. We'll see you down the road. Okay, that's the first one. Here's the second one now, again, just at the base of this really extraordinary statue. And here's the second panel. It's about 4 feet across. Upon the Corps' return, York was expected to resume his old life as a slave, but the taste of equality, superiority, and even freedom he had enjoyed on the expedition had changed him when Clark moved to St. Louis in 1808 to take up his work as a superintendent of Indian Affairs in the Louisiana Territory, and took York with him. York was separated from his wife. The lifelong relationship of Clark and York, master and slave, ruptured at this point. After the summer of 1809, the two men were rarely together again. York was hired out in Louisville to different men, some of whom mistreated him. Eventually, William Clark granted York freedom. That's contested, but probably. There's kind of a middle ground in there, maybe. But it was at least 10 years after the expedition's return. York's ultimate fate is not definitely known. That's correct. One ending has him returning to the Rocky Mountains, where he lived as a respected chief among the Crow Indians. That's almost certainly not so. The most likely ending, as reported by Clark, has York being set up in a freight hauling business, by Clark losing the business and regretting his freedom. I doubt that. But that's the kind of thing you say to your white master when you go bankrupt in your drayage business. Or that's the kind of thing your white master thinks he hears you saying. And dying of cholera in Tennessee sometime before 1832, a broken man trying to return to his former master. Again, I don't think that's true. Whether York returned to the West that he explored or was consigned to an unmarked pauper's grave may never be known, but this is known. York made an important contribution to the greatest exploring venture in American history. Louisville is proud to honor this famous explorer. All right, so then there's this map, and I won't linger on it. It's a bas-relief metal map and shows the route. What I love about it is that if you see, it goes all the way to Pittsburgh and beyond, to Philadelphia really, and should come down to Charlottesville. But I like the idea that it starts here, then goes to Pittsburgh, picks up the Ohio, comes down the Ohio, briefly up the Mississippi, all the way up the Missouri, etc., etc. So that came up during the bicentennial. And then the final panel is right here. On October 14th, 1803, Lewis and Clark met in Louisville, forming their historic partnership. On October 26th, Captains Lewis and Clark and the 9 young men from Kentucky and York pushed off from Clarksville, Indiana, down the Ohio. Now, I object to the phrase 9 young men from Kentucky. There were 9 young white men from Kentucky that Clark recruited, but York was young. He's the 10th young man from Kentucky, and it tells you something about race blindness, I would say. Not necessarily racism, but race blindness, that he is not the 10th young man from Kentucky. York participated in the expedition's work, dangers, and hardships, and acquired a degree of equality and freedom he had never before experienced as a slave. He risked his life searching for Clark, Chicagowe, and her baby in a flash flood, and he did help them. I don't think he risked his life, but he did a heroic thing. He hunted and fished, nursed the sick and injured, especially Charles Floyd, who died on August 20th, and York was sort of nursing him in the last 72 hours of his life. York's important contributions are chronicled in the expedition journals. The captains permitted York to voice his opinion on where their winter camp should be. This is the so-called vote. Therefore, classic, clearly demonstrating the level of equality and respect he had earned. When Indians who had never seen a black man before were encountered, bad use of the passive voice, York skinned the very thing that marked him as inferior and a slave in white society of that day, signifying as someone special and spiritually powerful. They considered him as superior, some did, to his white companions, and were amazed at his strength and agility. The captains used this influence that York wielded to help advance the expedition. The Indians named York Big Medicine to indicate his believed spiritual power and uniqueness. So it is true that he was seen as exotic and maybe powerful and maybe touched by the Great Spirit by some natives. I think it's a little much to say he was superior to his white counterparts, but nevertheless, I really like these panels. This is good signage, and it's exactly what's needed in the Lewis Clark world. It's not preachy, it's not self-righteous, it's thoughtful, comprehensive, it tells the truth in a way that has not been told through most of the last 200 years, and gives York his proper due as the 10th, and really one of the most important young men from Kentucky on the Lewis and Clark expedition. I'm Clay Jenkinson. We'll see you down the road.